Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who was talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Well, I'm sure it will be no surprise to all of us who live in this beautiful place that mountains are holy meeting places. And we hear a lot of stories in Scripture about people who go up the mountains to meet with God, like Moses and Jesus and others. And of course, we all have seen great churches or monasteries, at least pictures of them, if not having been there. They're built on the tops of mountains, the meeting places with God. And, we describe some spiritual experiences as mountaintop experiences. There's a good reason for that. And pretty much everyone knows what that means. So don't we all find inspiration in the beautiful mountains that surround us here in BV? Well, the Transfiguration is one of those stories of a mountaintop experience, and a very incredible and powerful one. Jesus shows us what happens on those mountaintops when God touches humanity. When God comes together with humanity, and Jesus is the conduit. Jesus is glorified and transfigured, and it was so amazing. It was glorious and dazzling, and in fact, it was terrifying. That's what it looks like when God touches humanity. And when God touches humanity, something important is happening. Nothing is going to be the same. Something is changing. The Transfiguration shows us something new about Jesus and something new about ourselves as well. This particular mountaintop experience over the centuries has taken on lots of different theological meanings. And of course, the obvious one would be abundant light coming into darkness. Another one is the nature of God. This Transfiguration, theologically, it tells us something about who God is and about who Jesus is. And one thing we know about Jesus because of the Transfiguration is that this is what resurrection looks like. The Transfiguration, the nature of God, pointing toward that fullest light of resurrection. And Jesus embodies that light. God's glory is seen and known. God has touched humanity, and Jesus is that touch point. And we also carry that light within because, of course, God touches us as well. That image of God that is within each one of us. That light that we carry within. The touch point. God touching humanity. So God is touching us, and it is glorious and dazzling. and even terrifying. What did you say, that dove, that dive bomb dove? Here it goes again. That voice of God that we heard in baptism when that dive bomb dove came. This is my beloved Son, listen to him. And so we know about Jesus that he goes from glory to glory, from baptism, the glory of baptism, to the glory of transfiguration, and then on to the glory of resurrection. This gospel story points us to something new and different, dazzling, and even terrifying. Now, I think it's important to have some context. This story just doesn't come out of the blue, really. We find the story of the Transfiguration in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's not in the Gospel of John, which is interesting in itself. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell the story in a very similar way. And one of the things that they do, especially in Mark here, they put the Transfiguration right in the middle of the Gospel. It's the 9th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. And the reason it's in the middle is because something new is happening. Something's changing. This is a turning point. It's like a hinge in these Gospels. There's a strategy there. Something in the middle is very important, pointing on to something more important. So the Gospel writers construct the story with this in the middle. And then there are things that happen before and after that all pertain to this story. Just before the Transfiguration, Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And of course, Peter makes his profession of faith, the Christ, the one coming into the world. And before the Transfiguration, Jesus also gives the first prediction of the Passion. Jesus points toward the beginning of that something new. Something is changing, and the cross is part of that journey. And then they go up the mountain to pray, and Jesus is transfigured. But while they're up there, the other thing that the gospel writers tell us is there's trouble brewing at the bottom of the mountain. The disciples are at the bottom of the mountain, and they're fighting about the fact that they can't cure this epileptic boy. And so there's trouble brewing at the bottom of the mountain. And when they come down, Jesus admonishes them for being helpless and divided. And of course, then he heals the boy. And then after that, the second prediction of the Passion, of the cross. And we hear in Luke's gospel at that point that Jesus sets his face to Jerusalem. And what we know in Matthew and Mark is that Jesus heads off to Jerusalem. I like the way Luke puts it. He sets his face. He's intentional. He's determined. He's going to Jerusalem, to the Passion. And so here we are in this season of Epiphany, where Jesus is revealed to us in many ways. The angels at his birth, the visit of the wise men, the baptism, the miracles, the transfiguration. God touching humanity in so many ways, in such ways that nothing will be the same. And this transfiguration that is pointing us on in our journey towards something that will be. The new life, the resurrection. But we have to get there. And like Jesus, we must come off the mountain. From Epiphany to Lent, to the way of the cross. Our Lent begins on Wednesday. And, I think a lot of us are like Peter. We'd rather build tents up on the mountain and stay there. Wouldn't it be great if we could dwell in that incredible place where God and humanity are so close and intimate? But we have to come down the mountain We can't stay in that mountaintop experience. If you've ever tried to do that, you know that's true. We come down the mountain and there's trouble brewing. The bottom of the mountain can be a dark place. From Transfiguration to Ash Wednesday, from Epiphany to Lent, from light into darkness. We must take the way of the cross in order to get to that resurrection, that transfiguration that Jesus prefigures. We must walk through the valley of shadows, through the deep darkness, on the way of the cross. And we can go into that season like Jesus does, with our faces set toward Jerusalem, with intention. Like Jesus, we set our face and we head to Jerusalem. We go to die with him. We carry our crosses. And we carry the light that we discovered on the mountain, that dazzling, even terrifying light of transfiguration. We take that with us into this Lenten experience, and it gives us courage and strength to carry on. We take that image of God within us, that place where God touches humanity. In this transfiguration, we experience the abundance of God, the grace that we carry with us on the way of the cross. Because we all know that as we go into Lent, something is changing. Something needs to change. When a dark place in our souls comes into the light of day and God touches humanity, we are healed by the grace of God on our Lenten journey. And that could look like a lot of different things. We may discover an injustice in the world that we haven't seen before, that we need to take action. Or we may discover a long-forgotten wrong that you need to right. Or we might realize things about ourselves we hadn't seen before in this dazzling, incredible white light, and discover a deep need for that abundant grace and light of God in our lives. So we go from Epiphany to Lent to Easter, from Transfiguration to the cross to resurrection, from light into darkness into light. And these strands of that journey all go together all the time. The strands of glory and the cross. The way of glory on the mountaintop, closer to God, with God, God touching humanity, a transcendent and mystical experience that brings us great comfort. The touch of God transforming us. That strand of glory in this spiritual journey. And then the way of the cross that goes right along with it. The way of the cross that Jesus predicts and talks about with his disciples. The thing we are called to pay attention to in a new way. God says, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. Don't argue with him about this way of the cross. Hear him. Because it is about real life. It's about what is." So we use this phrase, the glory of the cross. The glory of the cross. How paradoxical that is. The tension of that truth, those two things that are wrapped around each other that seem so different. So how can this cross be a glorious thing? How can it be a glorious thing? And one of the ways I think the glory of the cross makes sense is when we think about what we do with that cross that we carry. How do we respond to our crosses? That can be glorious. How do we carry that cross on this journey? That can be glorious. Those crosses can lead to new life, to resurrection. They can be glorious. But we choose. And if we want to, we can let that cross be just plain ugly and deadly. The glory of the cross is how we carry it and what we do with it. So we take that light of the mountaintop with us on this journey of the cross that we enter into on Wednesday. Valleys and mountaintops. Life is full of them. And we are about to come down the mountain, once again from Transfiguration to Ash Wednesday. We choose, we set our face to walk the way of the cross in the Lent that is ahead of us. Like Peter, we'd rather stay on the mountaintop and build a dwelling there. Let's live there in that place where God touches humanity. But we can't do that, so we will go with intention into the valley of shadows where we will pick up our crosses. We go once again from mountaintops to valleys, and that's life. That's what is. With Jesus, we set our face to Jerusalem to enter into the way of cross. And we have been given great strength and light and determination, those experiences that carry us through this Lenten season. The light of the Transfiguration is with us. It is within us. It is changing us. It is giving us strength and clarity. And like Jesus, we know where it ultimately leads us, to resurrection, to new life. The Transfiguration fulfilled in us, in you and in me, in each and every one of us. Thanks be to God. Amen.